what do you think constitutes a perfect rap album in the hip-hop genre?
I feel like when talking about, let's say, a perfect album, it's very different than considering an album a classic, because a classic is more of like an outstanding body of work that's been considered by the masses to be outstanding after years of consideration. But a perfect album,
facts.
also known as a masterpiece or a 10 on 10, I feel like 10 on 10 is a more popular term for it.
But let me ask you
needs
this,
to be
though.
executed perfectly and needs to, from start to finish, be consistent.
Okay, but I have a question for you, though,
Yeah.
all right? Do you feel as if most of the time a perfect album ends up getting the classic status in hip-hop?
A lot of the times, yes, but like take, for example, underground releases that don't get that mass appeal and that mass acclaim, that don't end up being recognized as classics just because towards the greater good of the culture, they weren't celebrated in that way.
I agree with you, but I also think that mass appeal does have less of a, let's say, play within this whole conversation. Because example, like then I could say like that underground release, let's say, was a big staple to the underground, let's say, corner that it was touching, and then that blossomed into more.
But let me ask you this.
Would that be considered a classic?
What about an artist that, let's say, sells 500 copies first week and the greater hip-hop community isn't familiar with it, but you heard it, and to you, it's a 10 on 10.
And in that context, yes. But
That's
how
what
many,
I'm saying.
How
That's
many
why,
scenarios
to me,
have you been in there?
To me, the difference is that a perfect album doesn't really need to, let's say, actually, let me rephrase that. A classic album to me needs to be really, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be.
Okay,
Like, for
that's where I
example,
agree with you. The Life of Pablo for me.
The Life of Pablo is a great example of that. Like,
absolutely.
not every track is
Perfect.
Perfect.
And like even at that, like, you know, you go through the album and you can notice some flaws within it, but you still have that iconic feeling around it. But okay, let me ask you another question, because I know you're a big fan of that 5-year rule. Does the 5-year rule
Stand for perfect albums?
Stand for perfect
Definitely
albums?
not, bro. Like, after hearing Daytona after like the third or fourth or fifth listen, I knew that was a masterpiece. I knew that it was executed to perfection and that it was gonna be a staple in coke rap. So, I mean, again, I think
you could really tell with those first listens, though. I think that first listen is like really, really, really important towards that whole process. But then again, like I've given stuff first listens where I just don't understand, or even, let's say, I would
comprehend
say
the entire artistry,
the vision
yeah.
of the vision of like the creativity, but I'm more locked in with every single listen that I get to, and then I end up finding it flawless. And this is actually where I want to start this conversation. That's what happened with me with Kids See Ghosts. And I think that 2018 was such a stacked year for hip-hop, and kind of, it's not that it flew over my head.
so you're telling me that from 2022, tracing all the way back to 2018, that was the last time we got a perfect album?
No, I'm saying that it's definitely in my consideration,
Okay.
though. I think
Okay.
that like the standouts from the last perfect album, like in recent memory, was that. Like I have some other albums that I'm going to bring into this conversation that I think dropped after it, but I think like if someone would bring up this album in this conversation that weren't you and I would be completely fine with that
I got
take,
you.
because
Okay.
you go through that 7-song track list and it's completely it's like vacuum seal tight. You know, there's not a single flaw within the production, artist performances, you know, iconic track list, the emotional value to it, the art behind it, even the album artwork was beautiful. So it was, you know, where do you find a flaw within an album like that? And then again, like that's, I think, the first album I have to bring up in this
Yeah, I think
conversation.
Kids See Ghosts is a great album to choose just because it was Kanye in a realm that we've never seen him before. Also, just like comparing it to, let's say, Watch the Throne also, I feel like Kid Cudi and Kanye were really on the same accord. They were on the same headspace when making that project.
That chemistry was inevitable too. Like it's literally one of the best collaboration albums I've ever heard. And going back to that year, the reason why I also wanted to choose it is because it came out after Daytona, but it came out before one of the albums that you're going to be bringing on your list. So I thought it was also a good time space to be able to include it. But I have some later albums on this list that I want to talk about.
I think the one that I feel like if I have to force myself to choose what was the last perfect album, the most recent one that came out, listen, it would probably be Sometimes I Might Be Introvert by Little Simz. And we gave this album an amazing review when we actually did our album review on it last year. And you guys can actually check that out on the channel if you haven't seen it yet. But as time has gone on, I've kept listening and I'm really finding, you know, little to no flaws. And I feel like it's the most complete rap album that I've heard out of the 2020s decade. And I just think that there's so many things to consider. I mean, first of all, how dynamic Little Simz' performance is throughout, because you'll get, you know, streams of consciousness on songs like Two Worlds Apart. Then you'll get these bold statement tracks like Introvert. And then you'll get her singing over an 80s pop beat on Protect My Energy. Not only that, but You had Inflow's amazing production, which was orchestral.
I think that was maybe the best thing working for that album.
Felt
to
like
be
a
honest with
James
you.
Bond score.
Oh, dude, it was
and
crazy.
what was cool too is that even if you like go to a lot of the tracks on that track list, for example, Introvert, you'll find that the production is like culturally embedded into the message of the song. For
That's big
example,
facts.
Introvert, you have the symphony playing. And what's interesting about that is that when you think about who the target audience is for, let's say, symphony type production, you think of, let's say, middle-aged or older white men, and that's who she's targeting for the message of that song. She's kind of, calling out people that are in the elite. So it was cool how she kind of packaged that track for the target audience, and I feel like that's the case with a lot of the tracks on Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, where she's really careful about the messaging and about every decision, really. And it was just also the most epic album I've heard in a long time. So do you think that it could get that perfect status, or is it still in the amazing realm for you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely one that I wanted to bring onto my list today because I wanted to talk about more like how this album makes me feel in context to like the way it flows throughout the track list. I feel as if there's a lot of emotional roller coasters throughout the whole album, and I think that's what keeps me engaged, but yet it feels so luxurious. It feels so grand. Like Little Simz is doing the perfect amount on the album, if you get what I'm trying to say. Like, she doesn't overdo or stay on any track as well. Like, everything feels super well calculated.
You know what's impressive too?
Yeah.
When was the last time you heard a 19-song album that was that fucking good?
Absolutely. Like, the consistency throughout the track list is fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's not, one good song on here. Everything is really consistent in quality. And I Love You, I Hate You. The way that sample matched the writing within the verses was super impressive.
Genius.
The storytelling on Little Q Part 1 and 2, like, those were storytelling cuts on an album that also had singing and melodic performances. Like, it's really advanced also. It's like, who's going to be able to execute track lists like this?
Not only that, but it came
Yeah.
out around the same time as Donda and Certified Lover Boy. And for her to kind of just stomp on those releases in terms of dropping the higher quality project when you have two of the biggest artists in hip hop competing with you, that's fucking impressive. Coming from a female hip hop artist from the UK, like, she broke so much ground with that release.
Absolutely. And now, like, I think that Little Simz is out of that UK conversation, and now she's in like the greatest, lyricist to be rapping right now conversation. The writing's impeccable, and the way that she executed upon that writing is impeccable as well. But listen, I want to talk about Mac Miller's Swimming. I want to go back to 2018.
Oh, yes.
All right, so I know this is a really big favorite for you as well. One of my favorite albums to have come out in the past 5 years, and I believe that I really do consider this a perfect album just because of the emotional connection I have to this track list. And I've never felt like that about an album before. I've never seen an album so vulnerable and so well tight knit together, and so many different explanations about life and yin yang energy and keep swimming and just the whole culture of the album. This album is a culture. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of living. So what emotional attachment do you have to this track list? Because I feel as if it's the best thing working for it, to be honest with you.
So much emotional attachment to this album for me. Like, this album has really helped me through some tough times, to be honest with you. And going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the episode, I just feel like when looking at a perfect album, it needs to be a concise body of work, and Mac Miller's Swimming feels like a complete thought. It feels like for that whole hour, I'm witnessing Mac Miller's lucid dream. I feel like he's conscious, but he's kind of, fighting these thoughts, fighting through his depression, fighting through everything that's pulling him down, but he's trying to keep his head above the water, which perfectly plays into the idea of the Swimming album. And it was just amazing to see also how the writing, for example, on the album isn't, let's say, the most rich in vocabulary, but he forces you to read between the lines, especially when he's talking about specific mental states that he's in. And I found that was super impressive. Also, the production from John Bryan from Thundercat was so intricate because I feel like
it created this world, all right? This is the way I feel about the production, and I think that I could perfectly put it into words. You feel like you're walking in, like, you're just walking with Mac Miller, and he's explaining to you all of these problems that he has with you, and the production feels personal. Like, it feels so minimalistic because even if it was overbearing or whatever, like you wouldn't be able to understand
Do you
that.
find it minimalistic? Because I don't, to be
have
honest.
like
'Cause,
example,
for example,
what's the use? Okay, like
that's a perfect song. I
okay.
don't find that minimalistic because
This is what I'm getting onto.
Hold on, it's a beat that builds, bro. You start off with like these boom bap drums, then you get Thundercat's bass line, and then you go into, let's say, this droning synth sound, and it keeps elevating. It's
Absolutely.
very progressive, and that's what I love about it.
I think yes, like there is certain hints of it, but for the most part, like, you know, songs that come back to earth, Hurt Feelings, like 2009, like, you know, even Jet Fuel to a certain extent, like a bit more on the lower end, and like that's what I think Mac Miller wants you to feel throughout this track list, is kind of this dark cloud that he has around him, and how now it's like a constant, you know, fight for survival, and even the whole concept that's being displayed of man versus man. You know, this is shit that you're learning, you know, within, you know, English courses, and like you're going through all these literary devices, and they're so well, I would say, implemented into the writing of this track list that even the storytelling, you know, this feels like a story of Mac Miller's progression as a human being.
2009, bro. Come on, what a performance!
One of his best songs ever. Too.
I just feel like when listening to this album, you could really feel Mac Miller's emotions, and he does that by bringing in these whines, bringing in these hums, his harmonizing. As a singer, he really stepped it up, and not only that, but I feel like this is probably the most genuine album that I've heard from an artist in the last half a decade, to be honest with you. And I feel like the way that he's kind of fighting, you know, as he's on this journey to redemption, looking for rebirth after he feels like he's been defeated, it's beautiful. And at the end of the day, he is trying to find peace, and it's inspired me to find peace within my life. And the value that you get from that is beautiful, because at the end of the day, the message to take out is that life is worth living. It's worth fighting to get to that next day. And like I said, from messaging, from the production, through Mac Miller's performance, everything is flawlessly executed, and it feels like a complete thought.
Absolutely. Definitely in the perfect consideration. But let's talk about Igor now. You know, like this was an album that I feel as if hit a lot of people in a lot of different ways, you know?
Does it fit our list? Because even though there's hip-hop elements, it's not a rap album.
No, like this is more of like, I would say the outlier out of the rest of the track list. Like this is not rap, but like we'll include it in this conversation just because I know that everyone feels a certain type of way about this album, especially within the community. A lot of people see this as the, you know, the top and the pinnacle of Tyler the Creator's career. And when you're talking about, you know, Tyler the Creator's career and his discography, you have one of the most genius discographies all of like within hip hop, let's say from the 2010 decade. So that speaks about the album. And I love the transition. I think that that's the most impressive part about this fucking album is the transition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you go from Flower Boy to Igor? You know, how does that happen, and how does Tyler make it sound so well done and so polished? Like going back to that year, I remember listening to Igor, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this had a big part of me like having Tyler enter my favorite artist conversations.
Facts.
Like I was a fan of Flower Boy, and I was hooked. But Igor did something else for me, and that's kind of where I'm at with the album.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, you know, when looking at a perfect album, for instance, you also kind of have to look at where it fits in an artist's discography. And I feel like when someone can break ground and really step it up and elevate the way that Tyler did here, you have to fucking applaud that. And I just love this track list because it's so efficient. It's only 12 songs. It comes and goes, and I feel like when you're looking at, let's say, the sonic palette of this, it's very fixated on, let's say, synth pop, and every song feels like I would say the whole album feels like one long song because it's all within that same sonic texture, and I found that was super impressive. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but in terms of being genre bending, it's one of the best genre bending albums I've heard of the 2010s decade. I mean, looking at the production, looking at the infectious hooks from Tyler, looking at the digital, you know, vocal effects that he brought on, all of that was super impressive. Not only that, but he gave you a narrative for you to sink your teeth into, and that's always a plus to me when an album has a story. And of course, you know, he's tackled the love triangle a couple of times for different projects, but I feel like it was the most focused on Igor.
The love triangle was perfectly executed, and I think that I also I noticed that while I was going through the album and how I was enjoying it, and you pick up on it super easily too. It's super it's well implemented within the track list, and I think that's what really got me. And even like the aura around the album, like the whole wig and the whole character building within it was super cool as well. And I have some of my favorite songs from the 2010 decade on this track list. Like Running Out of Time for me is fantastic. Something like New Magic Wand is fantastic as well.
Earthquake is great.
Earthquake is fantastic. Even I think like there's just so many great tracks within this album that you're not gonna skip anything. And I would have to say this, like, it's kind of it might be hard for some hip hop listeners to get into to a certain extent. That's the only thing that I've heard with it. But like to think about it as its own project that's come out, like I can't find a flaw within it. Like even the singing performances were fantastic because it wasn't like you're getting like Adele shit. Like it wasn't like that, but it was a different type of Tyler that. It just sounded so polished. It sounded clean. It sounded well used too in the album. Like his singing wasn't overbearing where, he tried to push it on you too much throughout the track list because it was so new and fresh. And that's what I enjoyed out of it too.
Yeah, it was kind of like Prince influence where he's just playing with those pitches and bringing a lot of, let's say, synthetic sounds into it. So that's another great release. One more that I wanted to shout out, which I feel like doesn't really get enough love. And when I first heard it, it was a very tough listen. Like I'm like, shit, this is tough to digest. I can't really like see myself playing this on a daily, but it's RTJ4 by Run the Jewels. And Killer Mike and LP executed on an album that feels very loud. It feels very brash. And it just, that kind of mania within the track list totally added to the mission they're trying to accomplish, which is making protest music that's calling out their oppressors. And it was also the timing of when this album came out because it was right around the time that the George Floyd incident had happened, and they wanted to speak on the current world events. And I feel like more artists should do that. I mean, I know how, like, let me know how you feel about this because I know a lot of people go to hip hop and a lot of music as a form of escapism, but I feel like when you're getting certain artists talking about what's happening right now in the world and kind of turning this madness and this raw feelings of anger into art, into a very expressive manner, I feel like that's needed sometimes, right?
Well, this was exactly what they said on social media about the album. Fuck it, why wait? The world is infested with bullshit, so here's something raw to listen to while you deal with it all. We hope it brings you some joy. Stay safe and hopeful out there, and thank you for giving two friends the chance to be heard and do what they love. And that's beautiful because I feel as if that's the message that's being portrayed throughout this whole track list. And going back to 2020, it's an automatic lock for that album of the year. Like, I don't think there's anything that touches it, and it came out at the perfect time, as you said. And even going through the track list as well, like Walking in the Snow is easily one of the best songs that I've heard in the past 5 years.
Absolutely. Lyrically, it's insane. And also how Killer Mike is switching from the first person point of view to the second person point of view. That shit was genius. And he's just talking about how the media will fuck you over, how they'll desensitize you to certain things. It's chilling, bro. It brings me chills. And I also love the production. I have to salute LP because it kind of feels like this the sci-fi / boom bap soundscape. It's totally out there and unlike anything you'll probably listen to from this decade.
And I think that it's extremely hard to digest too because the production is extremely unorthodox. Like, it's just not a bunch of boom bap productions and after that conscious rap. No, that's not what the album does. Like, the sonic direction is meant to put you into a certain headspace where like you're fucking like getting pumped, like that's another thing is like that. But I feel as if that's always been Run the Jewels' thing, is like they always put you into this adrenaline mode with their music, and that was not missing on this track list at all. And do you think it's the best installment out of the whole series? Let me ask you.
I don't know, man. RTJ2 is really strong
number
as well.
Number 2 is really sick.
I don't know, but it's really up there. It's really...
Again, another thing too is like, as you
two.
mentioned, and I really want to like go over this again, try to find a flaw within the writing or rapping. There's nothing. It's some of the best lyricism you'd probably get in the past couple of years.
Absolutely. Do you think Alfredo, because that came out in 2020 as well, do you think that would constitute a perfect album?
Then we have to put in Bandana in this conversation. Is it better than Bandana? I don't think it's better than Bandana.
I don't think it's better than Bandana too, but I like the fact that it's shorter. Like, I can kind of like go through that listen in a smoother way.
I feel you, but Bandana is not overwhelming whatsoever for me. Like, I don't think that. I think the timing's perfect of it, and especially with all these old Japanese samples that were being implemented by Madlib, like the soundscape that was being made within that year. honestly, like that was another album I wanted to talk about, like within this conversation. But I'm like, yeah, but like, does it really deserve to be in this conversation? You know, like that. But I think that I have it. Like I have it there. I have it there. It's almost there. It's probably there, but
So
I'm not sure.
What's your final verdict on like what is that last perfect album, the most recent one that we got?
Honestly, I want to say sometimes I might be introverted.
I think so too.
I think that
So
before that
we ended up fucking up on that review technically.
well, no, because like, dude, like our reviews are different because like
we need time to age with it.
absolutely,
But
like-
we did that review I think like 2 weeks after it was out. So.
no, but not only that, but like music is subjected to change within a listener's ear. Like the whole thing of like, okay, like my review's definite is kind of bullshit. Like I'm all
Absolutely.
worried about that. Like the review's more of like, okay, like how do we think about this as surface level, and then how we grow with these albums will be talked about on the podcast regardless. And this is one of those moments. So guys, in the comment section, let us know what was the last perfect album that you've heard. And by the way, we actually did that conversation on the classic album. If you guys want to go check that out, click this link and listen. We're doing these types of conversations on a weekly basis. Thank you guys so much for coming through. Please subscribe if you have not already, and we'll catch you in the next one.